everyone, my name is Pearlescent Moon and welcome back to week 3 of our year-long A Build a Day challenge. For anyone new to this challenge, the basic idea is that I create at least one build per day for a full 365 or 366 day duration. In the last video, we did a full week of organics and now we're back to structures. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into day 15. Every day for the third week, I researched traditional home architecture from all over the world. This involved bringing up the Britannica and starting right from the top. The first one to catch my eye were homes from Albania. They seemed very rectangular in nature, but exhibited somewhat flat roofs with curved corners. I grabbed a white and brown palette based on my inspiration and went to town. For this one, I began building by figuring out what terrain I wished to build on. My reference in mind had this sloping street met with a gated driveway, so I shaped it all out in stone with lapis marking areas for the structure to go and diamond marking road territory. Once that was established, I blocked out my base shape in refined ore blocks to help me get a basic idea of the composition I wanted. After that is roughed out, I just had to do a base replacement of my placeholder blocks to my chosen palette, and then detailing could start. Acacia trapdoors were used as railings, spruce slabs adorns the edges of the roof for more shape, and assorted dark oak blocks were added as roof supports. In order to break up large blocks of colour, I added the diorite as edging along the bottom, which helped form the foundation look. Once all the details are in, I was able to work on the landscape, with some simulated crop bushes to the side of the house, and alternating grass blocks and concrete powder for a rolling lawn feel. Adding trees then brought it all together. I find I love to add a gradient to the trees by starting with spruce at the bottom, moving to birch, and then using oak or acacia leaves at the top. It just adds a bit more depth to the colour palette and overall look. In the end, this one didn't feel all that close to the style I was going for, but I think it turned out fairly cute regardless. The base idea is that you learn new things as you go and find a building look that suits you. For several months, my home country, Australia, had been plagued with massive fires. Billions of animals have lost their lives, hundreds of homes have been lost, and many have lost loved ones, never to return. And to this day, the fires still run rampant in some areas. They are slowly getting them under control, but there's still a few left to go. On day 16, I wanted to show my love through a Minecraft build, as well as challenge myself to make a traditional countryside house from my own culture. To start off, I researched smaller country homes normally found in the desert outback. This involved tin roofs, brick or wooden walls, and small overlapped balconies off the front of the house. I decided my palette was bricks and hardened clay for the walls, with acacia planks and stripped logs, jungle wood, and sandstone for the roof. This created a bit of a nice rust look to it. Quite a few inspiration sources showed off the A-frame roof, with some also meeting up in the middle like a triangular prism. So I based my style off that, curving it ever so slightly at the bottom to create the lip over the front entrance. Due to the dusty ground for my research, I went for a coarse dirt ground with some granite rocks spread around. To complete the scene, I created a small shed or outhouse, a gum tree, a windmill, and a raised water tank. I felt fairly happy with this one in the end, and it was pretty cool to be able to build something originating from my own country. Day 3 of week 3 was my attempt at a traditional home style from Thailand. Towards the end of it, I wasn't feeling well and decided to go back to it on a second day with a fresh mind and body to rethink the detailing I'd done on the previous one. I am glad I went back to it as I felt it was an honest, large improvement. Regardless, as usual, I started blocking out my structure. The inspiration sources I found typically had architecture raised off the ground, so I put it on stilts to support the main section. The roof of my source joined up at the topmost middle with some smaller A-frame dormer sections coming off the front. I decided to use a contrasting grey concrete for my roof palette, shaded with wool and terracotta to simulate texture. The orange acacia vibe I had going on with the walls acted as a nice separation from the roof, where I also used the trapdoor equivalent for the balcony railings. I felt they worked nicely due to the straight horizontal and vertical lines simulating bars or wood. Of course, all these colours were picked based on my inspiration as pictured here. I thought it was a gorgeous home to make and add my own flair to. Using spruce trapdoors at the bottom of the pillars just adds that extra needed shape and detail to the structure, as well as utilising barrels for that horizontal line support. Although the spikes included on the roof within my reference image weren't as prominent, I also felt like exaggerating them a bit more on the build. Every build I make is typically accompanied with terrain, so I moved on to that after I felt somewhat satisfied with the base structure and started to put together the scene. I love using green concrete powder as extra depth to the grass, as it has a similar texture but a slight enough shade to mix in pretty well for a gradient. Going back to the build on the second day saw some extra lighting, revision for the outdoor area at the front, and slight details to just bring it all together. The main part that felt uncomfortable was the terrain at the front. I wanted to give it more purpose, so I added a path that descended and extended the stone platform a bit further out to cover the seating area. Adding a foundation to this section also melded it with the terrain a bit more and allowed it to feel a part of the structure. Day 18 was one of the biggest builds I've made that week and in the challenge thus far. I ended up basing this one on traditional Italian home architecture in a city-like location. Judging from my image search, it came up with buildings packed quite tight together with plants intertwined throughout. I loved the look of it and decided to try a small scene myself. I've always wanted to go to Italy, and especially Venice, so it definitely was a build inspired from that. My vision included buildings making their way up alongside a sloped clay road like stairs otherwise would, with a small path that stemmed off from the side as a small walkway of sorts. Mixing in diagonal, off-axis, and straight buildings all in one gave it a bit of flow and depth to the build, as I previously mentioned in week 1 of this challenge. If I were building these homes all straight, the build would feel vastly more flat and less interesting to look at. Adding height to either side of the road envelops the player when on the ground and gives that populated feeling I was going for. For the palette, I felt that playing around with different browns and whites gave it this soft and slightly warm atmosphere, at the same time supporting the natural green of the plants. While building, I had 3 main block types: hardened clay, bone block, and sandstone. I alternated these 3 choices in order to create a separation between each building I added. Spruce and dark oak were my main planks of choice to alternate between for the roofs. In order to fill in some awkward areas that I felt ruins the flow, I'd added in a few balconies. A bridge at the back to go over an archway made the scene feel like it could also keep going if it wanted to, rather than being confined to the 2x2 chunk area I'd made it in. It also served as a nice point of focus for the build. Traditional Danish homes were the inspiration for day 19. I felt like trying to incorporate some sort of body of water within the build, so I went with a canal that would run alongside the streets of buildings, accompanied by a little bridge that went over the top to create more flow off to the side, somewhat similar to the concept of the tunnel on the day prior. I used my Italian build from the previous day as a bit of inspiration for trying some sort of diorama type mini build, so it ended up as a town encased with a border. However, the elevation on this one wasn't as drastic as a lot of Danish homes I found were on quite flat land. One mistake I made while making this, however, was that I added 2 height levels worth of homes, when these particular buildings from Denmark were typically 1 row of buildings with open air above them. I was given this feedback on Twitter, and looking back at it, I believed that to be true. Regardless, I was still fairly okay with how it turned out as a general build, as it started off inspired by that particular style, and I added my own flair to it. I'm sure one day I'll give it another go with that feedback in mind. The palette of the reference images I found were all fairly saturated, ranging from bold red to a vibrant blue, so I attempted to add that level of colour in the separate buildings I created. A struggle I had while making this one is that the buildings typically included some type of Tudor vibe, with small wall details that displayed wooden beams crossing as support. This was very hard to replicate in Minecraft, so I had to simplify it quite a bit, yet at the same time add a bit of my own personal detailing. As usual, to tie the scene together, I had to add some form of greenery. kind of feels like it gives a bit more life to the build. By day 20, I was slightly running out of time, so decided to go for something a bit smaller. While I was in California late last year, I visited a Japanese tea garden in San Francisco. It was an absolutely gorgeous garden, and I came across a small gift shop within, where I had to take a picture. The structure had a very traditional Japanese architecture cabin feel to it, so I felt inspired to try my hand at making something similar within Minecraft. I kept to a very brown palette, but broke it up with some white walls on the side and sandstone or birch details. I found putting a spruce sign on the side of a trapdoor gave me the balcony fencing I was aiming for, and was super happy about that while building. I definitely recommend trialing different ways you can make small details, as you may find yourself pleasantly surprised, or may even come up with some cool new way to make something by complete accident. By the words of Bob Ross, there are no mistakes, just happy accidents. In order to get that very green nature feel, I enveloped this structure in trees. Comprised of jungle wood and 4 different types of leaves including spruce, birch, oak and jungle, I put together a few trees to paste around the side. I also find adding a little bit of grass on top with World Edit gives more of a fluffy feel to it. Unfortunately, it's not possible in Survival or Vanilla Creative, but if you have World Edit as a plugin or mod in your single player client, it's well worth trying out. In Japan, you'll typically find bamboo forests scattered around the country, and I wish to add a bit of that in utilizing the new bamboo plants that came with 1.14. I coupled this with just a bit of sugarcane as a farm for the countryside forest appeal, some garden details, and some light fence work to call it a day. In the end, I wasn't too sure about the build, but I think it could look alright in a larger context. The final day of week 3 was inspired by Norwegian homes. These particular choices of reference had the traits of grassy roofs, wooden walls, and balconies overlooking a bottom level below. Based on this, I went to town. I just love me some nature. In order to put a bit of a spin on things, I made the last one entirely on a diagonal plane. I'm not sure if it was worth doing this in the end, as it felt quite busy, but it was somewhat fun to put together. I tried to create some sort of palette contrast by making the walls a dark oak brown, but the shadows of the build seemed to eliminate that contrast a bit. However, I do build all of these in moody lighting, so maybe turning it up could have proven a different result. I love the shadow depth moody lighting adds to builds, which is why I have that setting on while building. Chuck me into survival and I'll put it up all the way. One just can't see in caves with low brightness whatsoever. I guess this last day can be defined as yet another cabin, but in a way it's nice to see the difference of architecture between the two cultures side by side. For this particular build, I chose a more open, grassy hill with only a couple trees here and there, as per the photography references I found while researching. Adding that path cutting down the hill to me felt like it added a bit more interest and explorability to the build. And, well, that's week 3 done. What did you guys think of the different structure styles? I'm very curious. This challenge can be slightly stressful, but I've also learnt so much while challenging myself to create builds out of my comfort zone. Not to mention it's really upping my motivation for putting more effort into what I make. Building smaller than my previous massive scale allows me to focus on the minuscule details, which has been really cool to try. As usual, if you guys would like to see the builds ahead of time, I'm posting them daily on my Instagram and or Twitter, which I'll leave the links below. I believe we're up to week 7 now, so we're quite a bit ahead. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the coming weekend with a video on week 4. Alright, bye guys!